music to the noise, yeah, the mess we make. Machine Pun Kelly get caught in the fake. Facts and logic with a twist of chest. Strip it down to truth, yeah, forget the rest. You propose the lies right out of the park. Look beyond the shadows that set the dark. Sparks of laughter fire up the night, bringing clarity when they blur the fight. Cut through the chaos, yeah, the tangled lies. Steve Fun Kelly with a set of clear eyes. Truths and jokes gonna rock this show. Step into light where the real facts glow.
Everybody doing? I am just finishing up a Blue Sky post right now that I took a little longer for than I planned. So here we go. All right, just letting the Blue Sky people know what's going on. So anyway, as you may have heard, there is a the Republicans are losing their minds because there was this news released, or this memo declassified, about how these senators had their metadata subpoenaed by the FBI because the FBI was investigating January 6th. And for some reason, the Republicans get very, very upset when the FBI investigates crimes that they committed. All right. So first of all, let's just talk about this whole thing. And I'm only going to spend a minute or so on this first part because it's just so inane and stupid. They just got the metadata to see who was talking to whom, and the Senate, and the, like in their little hearing, their little pretend hearing with Pam the liar Bondi, is all about, they were eavesdropping on us or whatever. And it's like the memo wasn't even dated until like 3 years. It was like 2022 or 2023 when they actually subpoenaed it, which is kind of hard to subpoena somebody and then eavesdrop on them in a conversation from 3 years earlier. Like, the logical value of their lie is so stupid that you would think that they would just like not even try it. But you can never, ever underestimate the stupidity of MAGA to like jump on board and be like, I can't believe they were, eavesdropping on Lindsey Graham. And it's like, they weren't eavesdropping on Lindsey Graham or Josh Hawley. But I do kind of wonder why he kept talking to Donald Trump that day, or whoever it was. Like, the metadata actually reveals there was a lot of conversations going on that connect dots that I think is really important. But in the larger context than that, there has been something that just annoys me. And so I wanted to dedicate an entire show to talking about the Green Bay sweep, January 6th, why it was a coup or an attempted coup, and why this false equivalence with BLM is just nonsense. So I think that the way to start with this is just, what was the Green Bay sweep? Because I think often when people talk about January 6th, they talk about it in isolation and not in connection with everything else. So I'm going to share this with you. I had a little conversation with Grok, and this is, not to say that Grok is everything or whatever. And I know some people don't like AI, but it just makes it easier to, is this the one? Okay, I think that's, okay. Oh, that's, okay, sorry. That's the wrong one. Let me share a different screen. Okay. Sorry for this. I got everything set up except for, okay, this is the one. Okay. So what was the Green Bay sweep? Where do we get this idea from? Why was it a crime? All of this kind of stuff. Let's talk about that. So what happened is even before the election, Donald Trump started trying to sow doubt about, well, if I don't win, then it was rigged, right? And so he was, running around telling everybody this. And if you remember, it was the year 2020, and there was a little thing called a pandemic happening. And in that pandemic, because of Donald Trump's divisive rhetoric, a lot of Republicans refused to, just stay at home and not murder people with their COVID breath. And so they were much more eager and willing to go out and vote on election day. Democrats didn't want to die, and they didn't want to murder people. And so a lot of states took emergency measures to allow stay at home, or like for people to vote by mail. And because it had become so partisan, because Donald Trump made it partisan, a lot more Democrats voted for by mail than Republicans. And this is actually this was the first time, I think, that Democrats were more likely to vote for by mail than Republicans. Typically, it was Republicans that would, close the gaps when the mail vote counted. But because of the partisan issues and because of the pandemic and just the massive number of people that voted by mail, this was sort of a unique situation. And on top of that, a lot of the states, and most people may already know this, but maybe forgot or whatever. But because of it being so many people, there were some states that said that you couldn't start counting the mail ballots until election day, and until after all the polls were closed. And so that required a longer time than usual for all the mail votes to be counted. And there was portrayed by the president and by people in right-wing media, and maybe even not explained adequately by people in the not right-wing media. I won't say left-wing media, because I don't think there's really much of a left-wing media that exists. There is no, MSNBC is not the opposite of Fox. MSNBC is left-leaning, yes. Fox News is a right-wing propaganda machine. And there is a huge difference between the two. But anyway, no one explained it enough that there was this description that, oh, these votes are still coming in. These votes are still coming in. That's what they kept saying. The right-wing politicians, Donald Trump, the right-wing media. But no votes were coming in. And I would like to remind everybody that has not thought about this before that almost all the mail-in votes came in long before the same day voting happened. If you mailed in a vote on October 1st and it wasn't counted until November 8th, that does not mean your vote came in. It just means that your vote sat there for a month and a half. And they made it sound like they were finding these votes. That was the other thing that they would say. Oh, they keep finding votes. No, they keep counting votes. They were never lost. They didn't go and look under a drawer and say, oh, look, here's more votes. No, they knew exactly where all the votes were. It just took longer to count them. And so they were using this kind of hyperbolic rhetoric and false equivalence and all kinds of stuff to so doubt into who really won the election. And they filed all these court cases and they lost all these court cases over the next couple of months. I think they won one court case out of like 78. And the one they won wasn't even like really a win. It was just sort of a half win, and that ended up being a loss. And it wouldn't have made any difference anyway. And at the time, like, I would read the judges' decisions, and it's not like they want to say, oh, well, they just lost because they didn't have standing, as though not having standing is just like a legal loophole or something. Well, they got dismissed because they didn't have standing, because you need to have standing to sue. But a lot of that doesn't mean that they would have won if they had standing. And so if you go and you look at some of the cases, the judges would go and they would evaluate the rest of the merits of the case and say, this would not have survived on the merits anyway. They would get thrown out based on standing, but that doesn't mean they had merits. And the way that a lot of the Republicans act is like, if they had standing, they would have won on the merits, but they wouldn't have won on the merits either. There is not a single case where they would have won on the merits, because there was no merit. And I say this, I wrote a Substack article on this in case people think that I'm just being one-sided here. And they're like, well, what about people that say that, Kamala Harris, that the election was stolen from her? I don't think the election was stolen from Kamala Harris either. And the reason for that is, whether you're talking about Trump or Harris or whoever, there is just the probability of being able to steal an election is insane, because you're dealing with different states that each have different laws. None of the machines are attached to Starlink or whatever. None of the machines can just be hacked and flipped without somebody finding out. There has to be people from, like if you're having illegal immigrants come in and vote, well, then you have people that check you in, and then that person has to be complicit. There is just the statistical odds. There's people that have done, studies on the ideas of getting away with a conspiracy, and the more people that are involved in a conspiracy, the less your chances of getting away with it are. And especially when you're talking about something like an election, where it's going to be high profile and you've got everybody in the media scouring it daily, it's just impossible to steal a presidential election. Whether you're talking about Joe Biden stealing one or Donald Trump stealing one, or whoever, it's just not possible. It's not mathematically possible. They're in the expense, it would actually cost like billions of dollars, and it's just way too hard to do. So I got some comments here. I got a hello. Hey, Titan Uranus, how you doing, buddy? And then Scott says, so the egregious thing about the Green Bay sweep in 2020 is that people were dealing with the COVID-19 panic and voter suppression. Yes, thank you for saying that. I'll comment more on that in a minute. Titan Uranus says, during transmission of local counts, Starlink indeed is used in some places, but even then it's not enough places, and there's people and they still have the original counts that you can always evaluate. And on top of that, here's an example. It's like people talk about, there's this one county in New York that had zero votes for Kamala Harris, and the Democrat that was running for the representative or Senate, I forget which one, like won 80% of the votes. Well, that's like an extremely Amish community where everybody votes, or not Hasidic community, and everybody votes according to however the rabbi wanted them to vote. So Joe Biden didn't get a single vote. Like the rabbi will endorse the presidential election. He doesn't vote the other votes, but everybody always votes exactly how he says. So Joe Biden didn't get any votes there either. And so there's always going to be anomalies, and those anomalies are actually proof that the elections are valid. When I was in college, I took a statistics class, and we had our first homework assignment was to go home and flip a coin 1,000 times and record each flip, like whether it was a heads or tails. And then, so it's just like ainch, TT, ainch, TTT, ainch, and, 1,000 times. And, like I sat there and I flipped it all 1,000 times. And there were times where I would get 6, 7 heads in a row, and I would think, wow, this is weird. Like, I hope I don't doesn't think I'm faking this. So I went to class the next day, and he just sat there and he picked up the stack of papers, and he just started glancing at them, and then he would either mark them as F or A based on whether or not you actually did the project. I got an A. And I actually did the project. And so he was saying, I suppose you're wondering how I knew if you actually did the project. And the way he knew is that people aren't going to expect anomalies, but anomalies happen. So the way that you would figure out the statistical chance of having 5 coin land head-ins in a row is each, the first time is irrelevant, because if you flip it once and it's heads, then the next time is the one that's going to count, because then you've got a thing. So the second time of getting heads would be 1 and 2, and then each time it would be again 1/2 of that. So 1 and 2, then 1 and 4, 1 and 8, 1 and 16. So your chances of getting the same toss in a row, whether it's heads or tails, doesn't matter, is 1 in 16. 6 in a row is 1 in 32. 7 in a row is 1 in 64. So if you're going to get toss a coin 1,000 times, you're going to get 7 heads in a row or 7 tails in a row at some point, probably a few times. So what happens is when people are just not faking it, they're not going to go 7 times in a row because it just seems wrong. But so what he would do is he just looked for at least 7 heads in a row or 7 tails in a row. If you didn't have a long string like that, then he knew you faked it. If you did have a long string like that, he knew you did it. And if you did have a long string like that and you did fake it, then you at least understood the statistics enough that you passed. That was his logic. So there's always going to be outliers. There's always going to be statistical anomalies. And that's how you know it's real. If there weren't any, I would be much more concerned than if there are some. And especially why was this outlier? Well, because this is a Hasidic community with the rabbi that, this is a consistent thing. And you're like, oh, okay. So anyway, the 2020 election wasn't stolen. The 2024 election wasn't stolen. Getting back to the Green Bay. Oh, wait, we've got to. So not arguing for it, the evidence is all circumstantial, but staying silent isn't used as objectively incorrect. I did not know about the transferring thing. I as far as I know, and what I've read, none of the actual ballot boxes, and what I mean by that, the actual place where the ballots are held, none of those are connected to the internet. So those cannot be hacked, not even by Starlink. If I'm wrong, then I'm happy to look at a link you have to say, because I know you're not just spouting nonsense. So the and back to the 2020 election. So they sowed all this stuff, filed all these lawsuits that they were so bad, lawyers actually lost their license over it, including Rudy Giuliani in 2 different states. Well, DC and New York, not two different states, but two different places. And that was like a circus. Remember when he farted on the girl? Oh, what was her name? Anyway, it was all so weird and crazy and insane. And there was like the Four Seasons thing, and it was just a big ridiculous thing. But the MAGAs were eating it up. They were really believing this nonsense, right? And so that was phase one of the Green Bay sweep. And so now I want to talk about what is the Green Bay sweep and why it matters in context of January 6th. Okay. So I went to Grok and I just asked it to provide an outline. So the Green Bay sweep was a procedural strategy designed to subvert certification of the 2020 US presidential election results, aiming to keep Donald Trump in office by delaying and challenging the Electoral College vote on January 6, 2021. Named after the famous Packers sweep football play from the Green Bay Packers, the plan was conceived as an alternative to failed post-election lawsuits, the ones we were just talking about, particularly those pushed by Sidney Powell's crack and legal efforts. She's the one that got farted on, which Navarro later called highly counterproductive antics. It drew inspiration from memos by John Eastman, which outlined how Vice President Mike Pence could reject electoral votes and send them back to the battleground states for Republican legislatures to recertify in Trump's favor. So the idea was create all this confusion about who really won, then have Republicans claim that the person who really won was Donald Trump, and then to overturn the election. And then Mike Pence's role in all this, which was the most pivotal role, was to say, we don't accept these results. And eventually the whole hope was that it would create enough confusion that it would go into this backup plan in the 16th Amendment where every state gets a vote for who won. And that would, like whether you're California or you're, Wisconsin or Idaho or Wyoming, you got the same number of votes. All 50 states got one vote. And then the majority of the people in that state, or the majority of representatives and senators combined in each state, they decide which vote that state goes for. And because the Republicans have all these little small states, they would actually have more votes if it kicked to that, and they could just say Donald Trump won, even though Donald Trump did not win. So Joe Biden won, then mid to late November, they tried all the legal challenges that didn't work. Then in December of 2020, Steve Bannon, former Trump strategist, coins the term Green Bay sweep and collaborates with Navarro, the man who cannot talk if you handcuff him because he cannot talk without moving his hands, to outline the play. The strategy involves over 100 Republican members of Congress objecting to electoral votes from at least 6 contested states, triggering mandatory 2-hour debates per chamber per state, up to 24 hours of televised hearings. The goal, pressure Pence to return votes to GOP-controlled state legislatures for decertification, bypassing courts and media. Trump is briefed and expresses support, though Navarro claims he never spoke directly to Trump about specifics, although Trump clearly knew the specifics. Key congressional allies include Senator Ted Cruz and Representative Paul Gosar, who agreed to lead objections. And they both did object, as did a bunch of others. And these objections were not based in reality. There was no reason to subject. This was all the fake electors scheme, where what happened is these states well, I shouldn't say the states. Republicans in these states just declared that they were the winners. They forged certification certificates that were fake, and then they brought those there, and then I forget, was it Gosar? Anyway, they tried to pass those off as being as equally valid as the actual certificates. They just tried to ignore what the voters said entirely. And they tried to set all that aside. So then there was this goal. Okay, so Navarro and Bannon emphasized the plan requires peace and calm on Capitol Hill. No peace. I don't know whether that's true or not. It was clearly not something that Trump was doing when he, said, let's come here and let's be, it'll be wild and all of that. So on December 14th, the electoral votes are cast, formalizing Biden's win with 306 electoral votes to Trump's 230. December 17th through 31st, Navarro finalizes his fraud reports for distribution to objectors. There was no fraud. This was all just propaganda. And Bannon uses his War Room podcast to rally support, framing it as a nonviolent procedural maneuver. But while all that's going on, you also have people that were connected to Roger Stone, and Roger Stone was connected to people like the 3%ers, the Proud Boys, and so on, who are organizing and planning the riot. So there's like this kind of plausible deniability something going on where Donald Trump is not directly telling meeting with anybody or telling any of these people what to do. But Roger Stone is meeting with them, and it's pretty obvious that they were not just, operating without orders. You had several of them going and getting tours from representatives while the Capitol building is closed the day before the riot. And they're not going and touring the Capitol building the way normal people do. They were looking at soft spots and being led to places where they could see where the cameras were, whatever. Like, this was not your typical tour. This was a logistical tour, not a tourist tour. So then you have January 6th come along, and you have people working with the plan. You've got Donald Trump with his rally and saying, go fight, 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 fight. And I know there was this one little clause where he said, but do it peacefully. But, Donald Trump, he'll talk out of both sides of his butt all the time. So he's doing all that. They're having this rally. And even before the rally starts, you've got some of the provocateurs that are going to be leading the riot. They're already there starting the riot. While the rally's going on, then everybody comes down, and you've got, like the worst part starts happening after Donald Trump's, tweets his famous, so like 1:30 to 2. All right, so let me read this. Navarro exchanges messages with Bannon, confirming readiness. We are executing the Green Bay sweep today. What does that mean? If he is not intending to execute the Green Bay sweep today, why is he tweeting Bannon? Why is he messaging Bannon? We are executing the Green Bay sweep today. The joint session of Congress begins certifying votes. Gosar and Cruz object to Arizona's 11 electors, which, last I checked, Arizona starts with the letter A, and they go in alphabetical order. So that's the first swing state where somebody could challenge the electors. And there's no actual basis. They talk about, well, people didn't have confidence. Yeah, they didn't have confidence because the president of the United States spent the last 4 months lying to them. That's not a valid legal reason. But over 100 Republicans are poised to join sequential challenges in other states. So this is the plan. And they're doing it. They're trying to delay the vote. They are not trying to, you know, what they're hoping is that, you know, even in the Constitution, it says it has to be January 6th. So if they can push it to January 7th, then they can say, well, this didn't happen. There's all this confusion. We need to figure out a way to resolve this. This was an actual attempt to change the outcome of the election. Anything otherwise is a lie. Even the rally, while it might be officially, the petition might have been signed up under something else, they called it a Stop the Steal rally, and the steal was the election, and their goal was to stop it. That was what they were saying. This was an actual attempt to prevent the election results from being certified and to install Donald Trump as president instead of Joe Biden. This was an attempt to overthrow the duly elected government of the United States. That's what it was. Sorry if that hurts anybody's feelings. Sorry if Fox News told you otherwise. This was a violent coup. This was an insurrection. And it wasn't just January 6th. It was the entire Green Bay sweep that was the insurrection. And that's what they don't tell you. They always try to take the one day out of context of everything else, but it's in the context. It was part of a plan. It's like saying D-Day was World War II. It was an important part of World War II, but it wasn't the whole thing. This was a part of the insurrection, but it wasn't the whole thing. The whole thing was a plan to stop the certification of the vote and install Donald Trump in place of the actual legal, democratically elected Joe Biden. So then, after the rally at the Ellipse, a mob of Trump supporters storms the U.S. Capitol, interrupting proceedings. They had to stop. That was the reason, is to stop the actual procedure. It was not like, you know, people are always saying, well, you know, they did all of this with guns and the U.S. military and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, none of that, you know, first of all, Donald Trump didn't send in the U.S. military. Secondly, that was never the goal. The goal was not that they were going to conquer America. The goal was just to delay the vote, and it nearly happened. It ended up that Biden is certified officially at 3:40 a.m. on January 7th. It failed. But the goal was to prevent that from happening. All of this, the insurrection, the riot, the challenges, the legal challenges to the actual winner, all of that was just a big plan to try and replace the actual democratically elected winner of the election with Donald Trump. That's a coup. All right. There's no other way to describe it. There's nothing else you can say it was. That was a coup. If you look up the word coup, I'll read the definition of the word coup for you. You know, it doesn't have to be a military coup. There's other coups that are not. So it is a sudden, you know, if they're just sitting there meeting in Congress and then all of a sudden people are barging through the doors. It was violent. 150 police officers were injured that day. And they say, well, none of them died. Well, one of them did die, but he came back to life. And then there were others that like took their own lives later. There's one that, while it couldn't be proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that it was the bear spray that caused it, I find it pretty darn coincidental that he died just a few days later. I doubt he's dead right now if that riot never happened. And then were the 5 people that were killed doing it too, or the people that were killed in the course of it. So it's still violent. People are all like, what's her name? The one that Trump gave $5 million to. I can't think of her name. Like she was some sort of victim. She wasn't a victim. She was attempting a coup. And they say, well, she didn't have a weapon. Well, first of all, she did have a weapon. She had a knife in her pocket. Secondly, the cop had no way, the person that shot her had no way of knowing whether she had a weapon. And number 3, she was the weapon. Like, what were they supposed to do? 2,000 people coming through, and they're supposed to, like, have 5 people apprehend each one as one they come through, one at a time? You know, you've got a mob. You don't sit there and, you know, like try and subdue them one at a time. Not when the vice president is less than 100 feet away, running for his life. Their job is to protect the life of the president of the United States. It's, you know, if she didn't want to die, she shouldn't have been trying to climb through a barricaded door and breaking open the window and like looking at a cop holding a gun, or a Secret Service agent holding a gun going, gee, I should just go through here. He won't shoot me. I'm white. It was violent. They were beating people with flags. The poor guy that was stuck in the door. Tell them it wasn't violent. It was a violent attempt. A sudden, violent, and unlawful seizure. There was certainly nothing lawful about this, and it's an unlawful seizure of power from a government, which is what trying to overturn an election is. This was 100% a coup, and if anybody ever tells you otherwise, they either don't know what they're talking about or they're lying through their teeth. It was a 100% coup, and you have people. Ted Cruz should be prosecuted. I don't, like, they're all wounded because, oh, they looked at my metadata. You tried to overthrow the country, Ted. You're a criminal, Ted. I am so tired of them acting like they're the victims here. As though, what do you call everybody that was not, or that voted for Biden? And I don't care, even if you lived in a state. I live in Texas. Joe Biden obviously did not win Texas. That does not mean that my vote shouldn't count. Every person that voted for Joe Biden, 81 million people voted for Joe Biden, and they tried to just discard all 81 million of those votes. And they want to pretend they're the victims in this because the FBI actually dared investigate the crime that they committed. You know why they didn't subpoena Adam Schiff's metadata? Because Adam Schiff wasn't complicit. He wasn't a part of the coup. It was a coup. And people like Lindsey Graham and Ted Cruz and Ron Johnson were all complicit. They all wanted to overturn the results of the election. Ted Cruz said he wanted to go and argue the case before the Supreme Court as though there was a case to argue. They're criminals and they're traitors and they're treasonous. They tried to replace 81 million votes illegally. If that's not a coup, what is? It doesn't have to be they call it a military coup because military is the adjective there. That means that's a type of coup, a military coup. Not all coups are military coups. You had Donald Trump sitting in his dining room watching that crap on TV instead of calling in the guard, and they make up this nonsense about how Nancy Pelosi didn't want, like, you can't even make sense out of their rebuttals, you know, like, okay, the FBI, under the guy that Donald Trump appointed as head of the FBI, planted agents in there to try and start a riot to prevent the count of the vote because they were in the bag for Joe Biden, who would have benefited from the actual vote being counted. Like, it doesn't even make logical sense. Even the conspiracy theories are too stupid to follow a thread through. But here they are, all upset and butthurt because the FBI had the audacity to investigate a crime, which is, the last I checked, what the FBI is supposed to do. There's a Matt Gaetz joke here, because Matt Gaetz metadata that was only 4 years old too. Get it? Date. Never mind. Probably not a good joke. Anyway, release the Epstein files, by the way. The other thing that they do is they keep trying to draw this false equivalence between the BLM protests and the Donald Trump coup. And so first of all, let's look at this in order. First of all, the difference is there's like several big differences. But one of the biggest differences and one of the biggest false equivalences is just the scope and size. So they try and equate like thousands of protests across hundreds of cities that lasted for months with what happened within a few hours on a single day. And, you know, like, the estimates are there are around 20 to 40 million people that participated in the BLM protests. And it's like 93 to 95% of them had no issues at all. Like, most of them did not have issues. There were, you know, like this 5 to 7% where there were some arrests, but even most of those arrests, there were about 14,000 arrests out of the 20 million people that came, right? And of those 14,000 arrests, most of those were for nonviolent things. Like, they were for, you know, out past curfew when they started issuing curfews. And most of those were never even prosecuted. They were just, you know, to disperse people. There were, in the end, there were 300 federal crimes that were prosecuted. I don't know how many state crimes. But for the most part, the BLM protests were peaceful. There were some people that were violent, but not all the people that were violent were protesters. The good chunk of them were what you call the Boogaloo Boys, BOIS. And they were agitators and provocateurs, and they were there specifically to cause problems and to, by doing so, diminish what the BLM protests were. So they were there to start violence so that, you know, right-wing media would say, look at these BLM protests, they're causing violence. And the best example of this is the police station that was burned down in Minneapolis, which they will point to that, you know, right and left. But there were, it was 4 or 5 people that were convicted of that And those people were all boogaloo boys. Like they were, like right-wing nut jobs. But overall, there were 0.07% of the people that participated in the BLM protests were ever convicted of a crime. Only 0.0. So if you had 1,000 people, 7 of them, or no, I'm sorry, if you had 10,000 people, 7 of them would be convicted of a crime. Meanwhile, 63.5% of the people that participated in the January 6th riots were convicted of crimes. So in terms of like they want to compare total, damage done or whatever, but a lot, like a lot of that damage was not done by BLM protesters, and then they include the looters, which were not protesters, and that was a whole other thing. But they're conflating very different things in terms of the scope and size. The second false equivalence is, what was the goal? The goal of the BLM protest was just to get people to like pass legislation that would stop permitting cops from murdering Black people. The goal of the Green Bay sweep was to replace the president of the United States, the duly elected president of the United States. So slight difference there. They're like saying, oh, well, we can't just replace democracy, but you guys can go out and protest cops murdering Black people. Which is kind of a dumb argument. So this is just like a really disgusting false equivalence that they try to make. And it's, I think not irrelevant that, like one of the flags that was being carried around in there in the White House, never even happened in the Civil War, was this so-called Confederate flag. Okay. Now let's talk about the Confederate flag and whether it's racist. The Confederate flag was not actually the Confederate flag. Like if you went to a battlefield in the Civil War, you would not see that thing flying. Every state had their own flag. And I think it was like a flag, but it was like wasn't a big thing. Like most people didn't recognize it as the Confederate flag. And by most people, I mean most Confederates did not consider it the Confederate flag. It did not become popular until Jim Crow laws started being passed. And then people started flying it. And then again, during segregation, it became big. The Confederate flag only gets flown when you start talking about trying to rally support for racist causes. That is not a symbol of the South's heritage, which, by the way, when you talk about the South's culture, are you talking about the food that Black people call soul food, that you stole from, that you appropriated from slaves? Is that the food you appropriated from slaves? Is that the culture that you're celebrating by flying a flag that represents how you used to own those people whom you culturally appropriated? Is it the music that you culturally appropriated? What culture are you celebrating? Because there's nothing. I live in Texas. I was born in Louisiana. I've spent like pretty much close to half my life in the South. I've lived all over, but I'm no stranger to the South. I've lived the last 15 years in Texas. I know the South. Like, I'm not just spouting off here. Most of Southern culture is Black culture that was appropriated with a little bit of British culture salted in there. So when you say culture, oh, we're celebrating culture. Why do you need that flag to celebrate that culture? Why can't you just eat fried chicken like everybody else does without a flag? Why can't you just listen to Elvis Presley like everybody else does? Why do you need the flag? Why can't you celebrate the culture without the racist flag? That has nothing to do with the Confederacy, but everything to do with the history of racist laws. And I don't mean racist laws in this, I'm being hyperbolic. I'm talking about Jim Crow laws and segregation, like actual real racist laws. That's the heritage of the Confederate flag. So the BLM protests were just a reaction to like 250 years of white people killing black people and getting away with it. Let's be honest. And there was all this, oh, well, is this really true? And then, they point, oh, well, there were more unarmed white people than armed black people killed by the police last year. And, like there was the guy in Las Vegas and that was begging for his life in the hotel when the cops shot him. And it's like, I'm not okay with unarmed anybody getting shot by police. But when you're talking whole numbers, well, it's like there's more white people than black people in this country. So yeah, that's not surprising. But what's surprising is that it's actually close. And when you look at it as a ratio, you're 7 times more likely to be killed as an unarmed black person than you are as an armed white person by the police. These are not the same thing. The guy that shot up Charlottesville was able to be taken home. They didn't shoot him. He murdered a bunch of black people. But they were able, Dylan Roof, was that it? They didn't shoot him. They bought him a burger. Why couldn't they have bought George Floyd a burger? They don't even know if he knew that it was a counterfeit bill he was allegedly trying to pass. And we never will because they killed him. And they've come up with all this racist nonsense about the fentanyl in his blood, which they completely misrepresent what the coroner said. The coroner says the opposite of what they think he said, what they claim he said. So we got Pocket Brain. Hey, Pocket Brain. Don't forget that most whites in the South during slavery were bust-ass broke. The rich people held slaves and convinced their lessers that blacks were beneath them and all sorts of problems, etc. To some degree, yeah, there was some of that. And there was like people that would, get drafted and they'd pay somebody to go in their place. But I think that some of that is also exaggerated. 1 in 4 white families owned black people. It wasn't entirely like just, they're that like almost, like it was only a tiny percentage of, like I see people that will say, oh, well, only 2% of the country owned white people. Well, there were more people in the North, and most of the slavery was illegal in the North. And so obviously there were going to be, if you include all of that, and then there's also the fact that there were families, right? It's like obviously a 7-year-old kid isn't going to own a white person or own any slaves, but the dad does. And then on top of that, there were people that maybe didn't own slaves, but worked on plantations. And they're the ones that would beat the slaves and tell the slaves what to do and whatnot. So they weren't exactly anti-slavery. So slavery was still extremely popular in the South. And it was, there was a lot of concern that if you take away slavery, the economy would be destroyed, which is why they ended up replacing it with pseudo-slavery and sharecropping and whatnot, and vagrancy laws and prisons. And there's some actually on Thursday I've got a guest coming on that's going to talk a lot about the history here. It is really, I think, something that we need to know about this history. We need to know about the history of racism so that we know that it's there. Like, so many white people I talk to have never read an actual book about it. And it's sad. It's sad. We should learn that. They say, well, you want to teach this to our kids in school so that they learn to hate the country. No. We want kids in school to learn it because that's when they should learn it. And there's a reason for that. What you learn okay, sorry if I'm going to go off in this neurological slant here. When you learn something, it forms a synapse in your brain, right? And the younger you are, the stronger that synapse is. And to learn you're wrong about something, actually, it's like this. I have a friend that was he was a neurologist at the Cleveland Clinic that was explaining this to me, and it just blew my brain. Because what happens is when you learn something, it forms this neuron, right? And there's an actual physical connection in your brain that tells you this thing is true. It's not just, I think this and therefore it's true. And the more paradigmic that gets, the stronger that neuron is. Like the more of a part of your core belief system that is, the stronger that connection is. And the stronger the connection is, the harder it is to unroot. And so they want to make it, like the founding fathers were these perfect figures, these unquestionable figures. They were role models. They were perfect and everything. And, they don't want to teach that Thomas Jefferson actually conducted experiments to see if you could breed the black out of people. Like, how many generations would it take to breed the black out? He literally did experiments on this and wrote about it. And so Thomas Jefferson, the great champion of literacy or of liberty, actually did experiments to see how long it would take to breed the black out. So that's why Republicans, and you get these, like libs of TikTok and all of these people, that they want to make sure that when you're young, you learn what a perfect country there is. Because then when you get older, it's harder to question whether or not George Washington really had dentures that were made with slaves' teeth. And I think that's true, although there's some people say it's not. But I mean, these are things that they don't teach in school. They don't teach the Tulsa Massacre in schools for a reason. And the Republicans don't want our racist history taught for a reason, because then what happens is when George Floyd protests are happening, there's that neurological connection there that they can't change their mind. It's harder to unlearn something than it is to learn something. It's literally changing your mind, like weeding a garden. That there's this weed, this thing that you were taught when you were 7 is a weed, and you have to literally pluck out that neuron and replace it with new knowledge. It's not that simple. It's not that easy to do. So that's why we need to make sure people learn actual reality in the first place, and not fill their heads with what's the word I'm looking for? Zionist. No. Uh, like with this pseudo nationalism nonsense. Zionistic, is that anyway? We need to actually learn real history when we're young, so that we know it when we're older. And when we see a white cop kneeling on the throat of a black man, we don't get shocked. We trace that back to the hundreds years of lynchings and violence and all that kind of stuff that's perpetuated against black people. And when protests come up and racists call them riots, we know that is the history of all of these. They taught that the Tulsa Massacre was a riot that was put down. And there's ones in Louisiana. There's there all kinds of incidences throughout American history where black people stood up for themselves and wanted to do things like vote or have an education. They had white people come and like burn down and murder entire towns because people had the audacity to want to teach their children how to read. And that's part of our history that isn't taught in our schools, and it should be. And it shouldn't be because of DEI or something. It should be taught because it's actually our history. And they say, we want to whitewash history. How is not teaching what happened whitewashing history? But not teaching what happened isn't whitewashing history. They're literally whitewashing history. And I mean that in a racial sense too. So, okay, so Pocket Brain, 25%, still 3-1 minority. Right. Teaching history that is not flattering to the nation is legal. Yes, that's right. And not like, I think that we should be able to learn this and still have pride that we are a country. Was it Joe Biden actually that's I've heard a few people talk about this, like the idea that we are a country dedicated to the principle that all men and now all people are created equal. So there's that principle, but the history of our nation is trying to achieve that reality. And we've gone from a country where it used to be illegal, or it used to be legal to own black people. It used to be legal to own black people. Like, think about that, how wrong that is. And when, what's funny is whenever you hear white people talk about how maybe slavery wasn't that bad and maybe we should think about doing it, they're never the ones that are going to be the slaves. They're the slave owners in their mind. But we've gone from that place to where it was legal to own people to where 40 million Americans, including a lot of white people, stood in solidarity with one man who was murdered and said, enough. We're not doing this anymore. We are not a great nation, but we are a nation that has always thrived to be great and to close that gap. Whether it was the minority of abolitionists when the Constitution was written, or the protesters on during the George Floyd incident, around that, the BLM protesters, or whether it is the No Kings Parade coming up on October 18th. We are a nation that is better than Donald Trump, better than Ted Cruz, better than this Steve Miller nonsense fascist evil that is being foisted on us. We're better than this Supreme Court. And I know there are a lot of people that are ready to give up. Don't give up. Stand up. Let's become the country where we don't just say all men are created equal, but we treat all men and women equally. Let's be what we aspire to become. Sorry, I don't know where all this emotion is coming from. But I believe we can be better. I believe that fundamentally people are capable of being decent, of being kind, of being empathetic, of being larger than themselves. And you have a president that is telling some people to be smaller than they are. When he says, make America great again, great is a word with meaning. Great means larger, it means bigger. A great person is somebody who becomes larger than who they are. But whenever he talks about making America great again, he talks about making America smaller again, making America petty again. Let's not make America petty. Let's make America great by becoming larger than what we are, becoming more inclusive than what we are, by literally holding to the ideal that all men are created equal. Until somebody can see a black pilot and say, that's my pilot, and not question whether or not they're qualified to be a pilot. If we really want to be a country that deals with racism, we have to deal with racism. And once we've dealt with it, we won't have to worry about it. But if you don't see race, you can't see racism. And what the right wants to do is they want to close their eyes to all of it. And they want to just pretend it went away. And they want to blame it on Barack Obama because he's the black guy that believed another black guy. And so he divided America by believing this black professor from Harvard and having a sit-down dinner with him and a cop. He actually believes that all men are created equal. And so what's wrong with that? What's wrong with treating people equally? They say, "Oh, well, you're, DEI." Or, well, everybody, that, like, forget that. Not when everybody you think is qualified is white, and everybody that you see that's black you think is unqualified. You don't care about merit. You care about race. Anyway, I kind of went on a tangent there, but I feel like, like this whole January 6th thing, and trying to overthrow the country, and what Trump has been doing ever since then, and with Stephen Miller and Ted Cruz and all of these just repugnant poop faces. I'm sorry. I'm monetized, so I can't say the words I want to say. But all of this is just wrong. We're in a battle for the soul of America. But in order to recognize it, you have to be an American with a soul. Anyway, I hope every single person that was responsible for January 6th ends up rotting in prison, and that includes Ted Cruz and Paul Gosar and Lindsey Graham, and all of them. All of them belong in prison. And you want to say I'm not for violent rhetoric. I'm for justice. I think criminals should be prosecuted. So don't tell me I'm being violent either. But they deserve to be prosecuted for their crimes, just like any black man would. Sorry, Ted. You don't get away with it because you went to Harvard. Anyway. So anyways, it's for research. I'm sorry, Pocket Brain, that I don't know when that was said or what it was in reference to. So he says, you are now teaching history that is not flattering to the nation. Is okay. I already read that. All right. So anyway, to those of you who watched, thank you. And I would say I'm sorry for getting emotional, but I don't think I am. I think we need to get emotional. I think we need to really realize this is a fight. And if you're not fighting now for everything, what happens when you can't fight anymore? We've got ICE running around murdering people, trying to murder people. You've got the president of the United States saying that anybody who disagrees with him is a terrorist. Got him trying to say the military should use, the cities run by people he disagrees with as a training ground. This is it. We're either a democracy or we're not. We're either a republic or we're not. Let's stop pretending like those mean two different things in this context. We're a democratic republic. Anyway, want to mention a couple of things. Tomorrow, I've got another Antifa panel, and really looking forward to that. This is the I am not a terrorist thing. Yes, being against fascism does not mean you're a terrorist. So we've got some great guests coming on tomorrow. And like one of my favorites, Awkward, he's got another panel together. So please join us for that. And then on Thursday, I have a guest coming on. His name is Maurice. And what is his last name? He has written some books and a magazine called Black Zone Online. And he's a historian. He's done a lot of research on some of the things I was talking about today in terms of, Black history and how Blacks have suffered violence through the years, or and so he's going to come and he's going to actually teach me about this, and hopefully you can listen in and learn some things too. But he definitely knows what he's talking about, and I hope you can join us for that conversation, because I think it's an important conversation. All right, so that's it for today. I'll talk to everybody later.